heavily outnumbered.
Well, they always say that when you're fighting against superior odds, it's like wrestling a bear. You got to get your blade into his heart before his paws wrap around you and crush you to death.
The cavalry battle left the Macedonian phalanx unprotected. Darius decided that now was the moment to smash it apart with his side-wheeled chariots. 100 of them stood ready to be launched against the Macedonian spearmen. Once the phalanx was broken, Darius's army could encircle Alexander and his cavalry, and the young king's Persian adventure would come to a bloody end. Battle of Gaugamela. It is 331 BC. Alexander the Great is battling against the army of Darius of Persia. At stake, control of Asia, from the Black Sea to the borders of India. Darius has decided to send his side chariots into action. The charioteers raced toward the Greek phalanx. Ahead of them was a wall of razor-sharp spears. And for the men of the phalanx, there was a side of 100 chariots bearing down on them, each with 3-foot-long scalpel-sharp blades whizzing around the wheel hubs. But Alexander's battle-hardened troops held their nerve. At the last moment, when the chariots were almost on top of the phalanx, they opened their ranks and the chariots passed harmlessly through. For the charioteers, however, there was little hope. As they drove down the open-ended ranks, hundreds of javelins and spears finished them off.
He had really crack javelineers and archers out front, and he was able to fire at the horses. If you just would nail one horse in a 4-horse team, that would completely, the whole team would go.
Meanwhile, Alexander and his cavalry had gained the upper hand. Darius took cavalry from the center of his line to send his reinforcements. As they moved, they left a gap. Alexander spotted it immediately, wheeled to the left and charged straight into the gap, and straight at the Persian king.
At only one point on the field did Alexander achieve numerical superiority, but that was at the crucial point when he was charging at Darius.
The Macedonian phalanx followed right behind Alexander. The Persian battle line was broken. Once again, Darius turned and fled.
When the rest of his army saw their king and his entourage fleeing, they naturally figured, well, if he's fleeing, why are we still standing here, risking our lives?
But the battle was far from over. Part of the Persian cavalry managed to break away and attacked Alexander's left-wing cavalry.
And if that wing of Alexander's army were to have given way, particularly given way soon, that would have unhinged Alexander's whole battle plan and probably prevented him from winning a victory, if not led to outright defeat.
But once again, the brilliance of Alexander's tactics saved the day. He had created the rear phalanx for just such an emergency. Now it swung into action and came to the rescue, pushing back the Persian cavalry. When the word got out that Darius had run away, the huge Persian army began to retreat. Now the whole Macedonian army rushed forward on the heels of the Persians. Darius abandoned everything as he fled for his life. At Issus, he had left his wife and his daughters. This time at Gaugamela, vast amounts of treasure, weapons, and even the royal chariot were left behind. But Darius had gotten away again. Casualty figures in ancient battles often owed more to propaganda than to fact. The Greek historian Arrian reports that Alexander lost only 100 men, while Darius lost 300,000. Even allowing for such huge exaggeration, the Persians would have suffered very heavy losses. Armies suffered their worst casualties when in full-scale retreat. Alexander pursued Darius for 9 months, but the two would never meet again. Darius was stabbed by one of his own generals and left by the roadside to die. Alexander wrapped his own cloak around the dead king. He had Darius's murderers executed and gave him a royal funeral.
Gaugamela was the most important victory that Alexander won, in that it broke the organized resistance of the Persian Empire.
After Gaugamela, Alexander was unstoppable. He and his companions from the tiny kingdom of Macedon swept on through Persia. 1 year later, they were in Afghanistan. 4 years later, they crossed the Hindu Kush mountain range and invaded northern India. Alexander was fulfilling the prophecy of the priests of Ammon. He was close to becoming master of the known world. In 323, Alexander returned to Persia. One night, he attended a drinking party. He suddenly yelled and complained of a pain that felt like a spear in his chest. He lapsed into fever. Barely conscious, he was asked to whom he would leave his kingdom. He replied, "To the strongest."
If anyone deserves the right to be judged by the standards of his own time and not by our standards, it's Alexander. He fought as a hero. He was not a cold-blooded, calculating general like, say, Caesar or even Napoleon to some extent. He was there in the forefront on his horse, Bucephalus, charging right in there, and he believed that that was what it was all about.
On June 11th, he died at the age of 32. He wasn't a god after all. His body was covered in the scars of battle. He had been seriously injured 8 times and wounded by every form of weapon: sword, spear, arrow, and javelin. His body was embalmed by Egyptians and taken not to his homeland of Macedonia, but to Alexandria, named after the greatest commander the world had ever seen. His empire did not survive him. No one man was strong enough to inherit his mighty legacy. Instead, it was divided among his generals. Never again would one man conquer so much.